Happy to welcome in. We'll have to have ESPN stats and info check this, but I believe it's the first person who will ever be the beat writer for both teams playing in the Western Conference Finals. It's Anthony Slater of The Athletic. Of course, he covers the Golden State Warriors and the Sacramento Kings. I mean, this is going to be quite a year for you coming up, being able to cover the two teams who are going to be playing in this year's Western Conference Finals.
What seed are the Kings like coming out of? Is it a stunning, like, they come out of the play-in and make the West Finals, or are they like a solid, like, 3 seed entering the playoffs for you?
1, 3, 1 seed. Have you not? Were you not at Summer League?
I was at Summer League. Keegan Murray, yeah. What's he averaging, like 29 a game or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's bordering on a triple-double. Like, the way I had it, like, I thought it would be the Warriors, fighting through the loss of Mike Brown, winning a play-in game, fighting their way to the Western Conference Finals, thinking this is going to be the big revenge moment. We're gonna finally prove that we have made it without Mike Brown, and then Mike Brown gets rid of him in 4. That's how this is playing out in my head.
I like it. I believe that the 4 California teams have never made the playoffs at the same time. So maybe this is the year. Who power ranking wise? I mean, it's Kings Lakers down there 3-4. I don't know who you like more.
Oh no,
you're 100% right. It's Kings Lakers down there. Oh man, it's hard to. I can't. I mean, LeBron's still on that. As bad as that team it is, and I do believe that team is bad. They have LeBron James, so.
And perhaps Buddy Hield is the latest.
That's right. They may very well add Buddy Hield as well. That's a California power rankings. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to put the Kings above the Lakers yet. Like the Kings, like as fun as this has all been, and it is not. Even though we're still the butt of jokes at the ESPYs and all over the place. Do you think the Kings have had a solid offseason?
Yeah, I mean, and I assume we're roping like Mike Brown into their offseason.
Absolutely.
Right? That hiring. And that's a culture setter. If you are, we could take a step back and like really debate, like, should the Kings be all in on this Fox Sabonis core? But, considering they are, that's clearly the plan. I do like franchises that commit to plans instead of kind of waffling. I think they've built at least interestingly around those guys. I'm very concerned about them defensively on the wing, but I like the Herter move. Malik Monk, it kind of fits what they're trying to do. I think it's the type of backcourt mate that Fox wants. Sure. I think they have a chance to be better this season than they were last season. And heading into last season, they were getting a little bit. I mean, at least locally, it was like, could they make the playoffs? But I think they're more stable this year.
Now, when you talk about Mike Brown, you spent a ton of time with him down in the Bay Area the last couple of years. Just what is your takeaway from him? Because everything we're seeing is just the energy level is so off the charts. He just has a joy to him, and it kind of takes away some of the angst of covering a team that historically loses 50 games a year. But he seems different. And what do you think about this time around for Mike Brown?
Yeah, I actually came at the same time to the Warriors as Mike Brown did. I was covering the Thunder, those Durant seasons, and then the same season that Durant came over to the Warriors, Mike Brown came over, and I came to cover them. And I remember he was the first person. It was either him or Zaza Pachulia. I did like a little sit down, hour interviews with both of them in the summer. And I remember I'd never met him, and I feel like reputationally it was he's kind of a stickler for details. He can, kind of get on the nerves of young players who maybe are not so hyper focused on the defensive end and maybe at past stops that had, led to it not going as well. But I was surprised at how loose he was. Now, as an assistant coach, you can be looser than as a head coach. But I remember in that first year, there would be conversations between him and KD, when, Warriors players are drinking a beer in the locker room post game, or they're blasting music at practice. Like him and KD, who had come from the Thunder environment, was like, whoa, this is interesting that you can work and have fun a little bit more. And I do think the way that the Warriors operated, Mike Brown was known almost like a Thibodeau style. Like if you have an off day in the NBA season, you are spending it with a 2-hour practice. because you got to work on stuff where I remember him being surprised early on, like, oh, Steve's just giving the guys a day off. He's like telling Andre Iguodala to go golfing or something. And he could see the way that would kind of ease the burden of an 82-game regular season on some of the veterans. And I think over time, and I think you'll see it this season, I think he's beginning to adopt some of the kind of like the Steve Kerr qualities. He's I think, it's weird to say more mature as a coach, but I think, you probably mature from the age of, 45 to 55. I think everybody does in their walks of life. And I do think the Warriors experience was perfect for what he needed, because they needed him too, right? They needed the detail-oriented, like taskmaster going through defensive details. But I think he needed to kind of realize you could kind of ease yourself a little bit.
How involved are assistant coaches at Golden State? Because it feels like Steve Kerr regularly has, guys like Mike Brown. Mike Brown, he coach of the year. Like who's his most recent one? Was it Steve Clifford? I think was there, or
Kenny Atkinson is, and he was gonna go be the Hornets head coach, but he's staying to basically taking Mike's job.
How active are those guys, whether it be in practice and game planning? Like how much are they kind of tied to Steve Kerr's hip and what goes on?
Extremely. I mean, Steve Kerr's like, that's one of his best qualities, which is like, he delegates. And it is like a very open environment where it's not only just like, hey, Mike Brown has a voice in the defense. It's like, assistant coach 6 does, Andre Iguodala does, Draymond Green will get up and like run a meeting basically. But, Mike Brown, particularly this past season, they handed the defense back to him. And that was one of these stories of the Warrior season where, going into it, you thought that they had lost some defensive personnel. They were going to be better offensively, but they had finished 5th the season before on defense. Could they hold on to that? They ended up finishing 2nd. And like players, pretty much unprompted throughout the season would credit some of the stuff that Mike Brown was doing behind the scenes. And I mean, as far as how involved he is, not only is he game planning, the defensive strategy, but you'd see, timeout gets called. Let's say, usually the other team, let's say, is on like a 8-1 run or something like that. Steve Kerr's walking out to center court. Most of his assistant coaches are coming over to talk to him, but usually during those timeouts, Mike Brown would leak out of the coaching huddle, and he would kind of run the first part of the huddle before Kerr came over, usually to drop the next play or whatever. And he would be yelling at them about, defensive assignments. And it seemed, if you're just talking like strategy, like he truly ran the defense. It was like full defensive coordinator. Like he's the one making in-game adjustments, that type of stuff. So very involved, as a long way to answer your question.
Now, he brought a couple of guys that have ties to the Warriors with him to Sacramento. What do you know? I mean, we all know Leandro Barbosa, the player, but what do you know of him as a coach and sort of the way he connects with players? And then also Luke Locks, what is your take on him? Because we haven't really got our hands on these guys yet.
Yeah, start with Barbosa. He's obviously kind of like, the known name, former title winner for the Warriors. Well-liked, like one of the most well-liked people in the league. I'm sure if you guys run into him, and you'll immediately be like, man, walk away from the conversation like, love that guy. He's one of those guys. And, what they really like about him, among the other things that Barbosa does, connecting with players and all that, because he played, he can play right now. Like he's like one of the best players in the big 3. He just had like a game winner the other day. When they have scrimmages, like for example, when Klay Thompson was coming back and they kept having 5-on-5 scrimmages, it was like a month long. They were really trying to ease Klay back into it. They would have him guard Barbosa, and you would talk to Klay and he'd be like really mad at himself because he's getting cooked by an assistant coach. Like he's like that first step that Barbosa still has. Like when he was early on coming back from the Achilles, he couldn't guard him. But he also credits him for like getting him defensively ready, because being able to face Barbosa behind the scenes every day in practice was really helpful when, you can't bring a Jordan Poole during his off day and say like, let's play one-on-one for 45 minutes. So to have a coach who's still in shape, and, they had some injuries 2 seasons ago, and there was some talk about 10-daying Barbosa and it was like legitimate. Like they were like, maybe we could just 10-day him, he'd help. But that is going to matter. And I think Mike Brown saw that, and like having coaches that can play, it really does help. And they clearly gave him an elevated role. He was in the player development umbrella of the Warriors. He was kind of just dipping his toes in, seeing what he liked about coaching, if he liked coaching, because he could do a lot of other things in life. he's clearly decided he does like it, and he has taken an elevated role with the Kings. And I think, he'll be good for a guy like Fox, those quicker guards, just navigating the league. It's just so helpful to have veterans around. And I think that is one thing Mike Brown saw with the Warriors, just former players who can talk to players and have their ear immediately. So that's Barbosa. Laux, he was PD for a while with the Warriors. I know that Mike has already kind of attached him to the hip of Fox in the offseason. I think he's working him out on a pretty much daily basis. Former Florida State basketball player, another guy that you get him in a scrimmage, he can hit a few threes. He's a little past his playing days, but another just easy to converse with type of guy that has a history with Mike, and Mike put him on the Nigerian coaching staff. It's clear that Mike has guys, Jordy, that he trusts over the years, and he kind of tries to keep them around.
Luke is on the honeymoon, right? Luke isn't
that is the word? When is the honeymoon? You
I think it's August. I think Kieran gets married in August. My invitation hasn't arrived yet, but I'm pretty sure like it's August, and then they're off to, is it Greece or Italy for the honeymoon? And I think Luke is along.
I think it's Italy.
He is supposedly along with it. James might know the exact location. I'm not.
I'm not there yet. Although I do love Italy, and I wouldn't mind flying to Italy. If I got the invite, I would figure out that one. But I'm not getting the invite. Yeah,
this is a bad week to be in Europe, though. I know our guy Sam Amick's over there. It's like this historic heat wave, right? It's been in like the hundreds.
Oh, it's hot.
It's hot. It seems like I came to Europe to escape this. Like, what is 100 degrees doing here? You're listening to D'Lo and Casey on KIFM West Sacramento, KRXQ HD2 Sacramento, ESPN 1320, driven by Lasher's Elk Grove Dodge, always live on the free Odyssey app. Anthony Slater of The Athletic with myself and James Ham today. You said something a minute ago that caught my attention, so I'm going to go back to it and ask, Are you not feeling the Fox and Sabonis pairing? Are you not buying it?
Depends on what it is. Is it like a top 4 combo in basketball? No, I'm not.
It being what grounds this team and helps get them, out of this rut that they've been in for the last decade and a half.
Yeah, I think it could be the hub of an efficient offense. Maybe top 10, maybe fringe top 10 type offense. It's odd to say that in 2022 when neither of them are efficient three-point shooters. I think Sabonis needs to have a better year than he's ever had from three, because it's tough to have your two best players, your two highest usage players, not really as shooters. And then, they're surrounded, like they did get some shooting, which they needed to, which I do like that they did that. But it's just, to me, they're kind of a tricky pairing to fit around. But generally, I think they're going to be very difficult to play in the regular season because they're both lefty. They both kind of have unique styles. Obviously Sabonis can really kind of pass it, and Fox, Fox can cut off ball too. I don't think it's just going to be spam 100 pick and rolls. Sabonis is always the screener, and Fox is the ball handler. I think you could, go high post. Fox is in the corner, and having Mike Brown, who's been in a situation where the Warriors really use their guards off ball, will probably help. And I just think in the regular season, these teams come in, they haven't had 3 days to scout. It's like they're going in like, who we got tonight, Fox? There's like 10 minutes pregame about what these guys do. I just think you can have maybe some big scoring nights. And so I guess I believe that if they're that good offensively, if they can be 20th defensively, like is that feeling optimistic? I don't know. They could be a playoff team, but if we're talking gauntlet of the playoffs, when weaknesses are attacked, when your top level players are going against other, top level players, when you are being scouted on an everyday basis, I don't view them as like a combo that will be like second round pushing to get into the conference finals, if we're being honest.
Okay, so I agree, like completely when it comes to that. They've got a lot to prove, and I guess the good thing is they still have lots of room to grow. You were in Vegas. You did watch like sort of the Keegan Murray experience. Like, what was your general takeaway, and maybe what's your thought on the narrative, the national narrative that happened like on draft night, and then sort of by the end of Summer League, it felt like it was shifting a little bit. where maybe people saw a little bit more of Keegan Murray and were a little bit more sold like the Kings had been.
I agree that, and I'm not a draft Nick. Like I'm studying these guys in the week leading up. Basically, I've barely told you who Keegan Murray was like 4 months ago until I was like, oh, Big Ten tournament, he's pretty good. So in the lead up, he did seem a little bit lower ceiling than after summer league. I'm like, he could this could be a 20-point per game score in the league. I don't mean right away, but eventually. I remember seeing him sign his contract with his left hand and being like, oh, that's interesting. And then, you do a little bit more digging. You're like, oh, this guy is left-handed, and you can see it in his game. And like, there's so much polish to what he does where he can drive left, right, mid-range, just all the different ways he can score. He's kind of been pinned a little bit like, oh, maybe he's like Harrison Barnes 2.0. And once Barnes is gone, he basically fills that role. To me, he's a lot more fluid offensively than Barnes. I think he has a, higher ability long-term potentially Barnes is just kind of your catch and shoot, straight line drive guy. Where, down the line, Murray, I think could be like a second or third best scorer on a team. And that's good. I mean, it was clearly a good pick. If you think about the front court fit of him and Sabonis next season, it'd be nice offensively. I do think he does pair well with what he does offensively next to those two, but he's still a little bit slow laterally defensively. I don't think he'll ever really be able to like, hey, go guard Paul George, basically. And then Sabonis isn't a rim protector. He's not really a rim protector, good rebounder. I think he can go get a shot block, but he's not a guy you fear going into the rim. So I do I'm a little concerned about how they protect the paint with those two. But I mean, Summer League went as good as it could have for Keegan Murray, and I would say he has raised my expectations for him immediately and in the long term.
It feels like rim protection is the thing that keeps coming up when discussing this team, no matter how high you are on Keegan Murray or how much you're into the Fox and Sabonis combination or praising the shooters that they got either in free agency or in the trade that followed 24 hours later. It still kind of goes back to like, what are they going to do when someone attacks the rim? Or what are they going to do when someone's working the block? Because it doesn't feel like Keegan or Domantas Sabonis excel in either one of those.
Yeah, it just feels like if you're going to have a good or even average defense in the NBA, you need like you either need like a back line that just like gobbles everything up and it allows your guards to kind of spread out on the floor. Kind of what Memphis does, Boston a little bit. Boston's like on steroid versions, but the fact that they got Robert Williams back there, like Memphis has Jaren Jackson back there, allows you to play differently. Well, if you don't have a rim protector, maybe you're one of those teams that has just 6'6" through 6'8" wings that can switch everything, and you can just do a switch everything attack, and you kind of rim protect by committee, or maybe you're just not that high in shot blockers, but you're heavy turnover. You force teams into isolation because teams tend to iso ball against switch-heavy defenses. And the problem with the Kings is they don't have the rim protector. I mean, even Rashawn Holmes, no, he's not. I mean, there's really nobody on the team that is. And they don't have a batch of 6'6" multi-positional defenders. They kind of have offensive specialist guys. I mean, I think – and I know that Mike Brown thinks it's like maybe they can unlock Fox a little bit more as like a hounding guard. I mean, he's got the size and speed, and maybe that helps there. Davion Mitchell similarly, like maybe you can get out on the perimeters kind of a little bit your identity, but they're not going to be able to switch much, especially at high level in high level matchups, and they're not going to be able to protect the rim. And if you can't do either of those, it's difficult to defend at a decent level in the modern NBA. I think that's why you've seen Mike Brown. Clearly, Mike Brown has some control of the back end of this roster. You've seen who obviously he's added lately. Those guys are, theoretically switchable wings, but you're like, well, they're also guys that have never really firmly been in an NBA rotation.
Yeah, I like KZ Akpala and what are we talking about? Chima Moneke and those guys. Yeah, I think it's interesting, but I'll kind of go back to what you're saying. Did the Warriors have a true rim protector last year? And I know they have a couple of 6'6", 6'8" wings, but the switchability issue there, it seemed like he was able to get a lot out of a Warriors squad that's lacking many of the pieces that you're talking about. And so I think that's one of the intriguing things about, Mike Brown is that he was able to hide the fact that he had Draymond Green miss like half the season. He had Steph Curry at age 33, who's never been a great defender, but always been solid enough. Again, Klay Thompson coming off major. I haven't played in almost 3 years. And then guys like Jordan Poole, who aren't known. Sure, you got Wiggins, and sure, Draymond is a good defender, and Looney's a good defender, but you didn't have a shot blocker. You didn't have that much switchability overall.
Yeah, that's where like brains really mattered. That was like one of the smartest teams I've ever covered. Obviously Draymond's like the genius defensively. Iguodala, even when he's not on the floor, is like, an expert level coach essentially over there. But, they were just like, and that is where, if Mike Brown is sitting there, basically right now scribbling how he maybe can figure out how to defend. He could look back at last year's Warriors team, but I just don't know how well you can trust some of these players and younger guys or just guys who haven't been in winning rotations to like always make the right rotation, to always be held accountable. He's going to try, but that was the thing with him. They knew personnel every night, like they knew who to leave, who not to. They always had a level of effort. There was also situations where like Jordan Poole's an excellent offensive player, but there would be nights that he didn't bring the requisite physicality on the, they always said if he wasn't rebounding well, they didn't like how he was playing. They'd pull him out of the game. They would start. The other thing is they started Draymond Green and Kevon Looney together. That is like such a bad offensive pairing in 2022 NBA. And the only reason, just from a spacing perspective, neither of them can shoot. Draymond needs to handle the ball. Looney's like not a pick and roll center in a league that your center should be. But they were able to do that because what Steph and Klay do to a floor, particularly Steph, just spread it wide open by themselves. So that allowed them to be a good defense because while Looney isn't your traditional rim protector and while Draymond is not the shot blocker he used to be, those guys are still, I would consider like Draymond to be the top interior defender in the league, or, a top 5, and then Looney, top 15. He's switchable. It doesn't look switchable, but he's always survived in the playoffs in switching situations. So they were so unique in how they were built, and you're right. It doesn't maybe necessarily match up with how you theoretically want to build a team, but that would be Mike Brown's idea. But he's got a long way to turn Sabonis and Looney back there, Keegan Murray into like a Draymond, and but he's going to try. And to be honest, he doesn't need to make them the second best defense in basketball. He needs to make them the 17th.
You might have just answered this, Anthony, in kind of a roundabout way. You talked about how smart that was the smartest team that you covered. That Golden State Warriors team was the smartest team you covered. How much of what they did defensively is just instinctual in their basketball IQ and their understanding of basketball IQ, or their understanding of basketball, versus what that coaching staff is asking them to do?
Yeah, obviously they can execute high-level concepts, and I remember the Dallas series was one of the most unbelievable defensive series I'd seen from a coaching and a personnel standpoint, where they just kept switching up coverages before, they wouldn't go to timeout and go, hey, let's maybe go to a zone. Mike Brown would come up and he'd go double fist, and that meant 2-3 zone, and then he would go he'd put his hands up, and that meant signaling to him, let's go box and one. Then they'd go back to man. They would do that like on consecutive possessions. And I remember Jason Kidd being like, I've never seen this. Like, this lost. Is a defense in game. They just keep switching looks on. And it was screwing up Luka Doncic. They won the series because of it. And it was a testament to, Mike Brown and Steve Kerr, implementing all these things and all but it was also a testament to the fact that Draymond Green was comparing himself to Ray Lewis. Basically, he's like, yeah, I'm like, he's the defensive coordinator, but I'm the middle linebacker I'm getting the signal and I'm calling it out to everybody else. And that's, I think, the problem, the frustration I think Mike Brown might have early in the season is as good of a defensive mind as he was teaching, graduate level students, where now he's going to be going back to teaching, algebra to juniors in high school. And, there's nothing wrong with that. That's most of the league. It's just, he had guys that had been there, done that, defensive player of the years, 13-year veterans, guys who were obsessed with winning basketball, knows what it is. And not only that, I can remember there was a play in Brooklyn where Jordan Poole had a foul that he shouldn't have committed. They're up 20, it didn't matter. And Draymond Green is just yelling at him and basically demanding he gets benched right there. and then they could just bench Jordan Poole. And there was just a level of internal accountability that is just so rare in the NBA.
Who's going to do that here, James?
I don't know. You hope that someone would. They would take up the mantle of that, but it's so hard to find that personality on the court. And, hopefully the Kings have a couple of guys that don't mind taking that step and being, the rah-rah leader on the floor, or the guy who is demanding that you don't do things. I will say this, the culture of my bad, it got traded. It's not in Sacramento anymore. And so at least there's that. Mike Brown won't put up with the my bad culture. And I think that will lead at least to some improvement on the defensive end.
Yeah, and the thing, he doesn't need to rebuild the Warriors in a season. We all know that. But he's coming into ground level floor, try to build it up. And to me, the biggest thing is how empowered is he going to be to do it? How much leash as a coach is he going to be given over the next several seasons to, maybe bench certain guys, or, maybe they go through some losing streaks, but he feels like they're learning the right lessons. Obviously, if it feels like he has really good job security, then I feel like the core players have more, you're more motivated to listen to them. Whereas obviously we know the Kings' history over the last decade plus, where it's just because there's always so much uncertainty around. I just think it's tough to build a culture because nobody knows who's going to be here next month, essentially.
How do you think some of this other league-wide stuff shakes out? We're trying to figure out a way to get the Sacramento Kings to end this playoff drought or play in or whatever, somehow get this team to the postseason. I think a big component of that might actually be what happens with the Utah Jazz. Do they move on from Donovan Mitchell? And if they do, that's obviously a clear, we're scrapping this whole thing and we're starting completely over. If they keep Donovan Mitchell, I think that's a little bit different of a conversation. But how do you see some of these? I mean, KD, there was thoughts of returning to the Warriors, or at least discussion amongst NBA fans and NBA people about this. It was out there. I saw a Bob Myers quote from today. He likes the team where it's at. How do you think some of these bigger NBA stories shake out from now until training camp?
I do not think Kevin Durant is coming back to the Warriors. Number one. Two, I do think the Utah situation is going to
KD there. I got it. Is KD not liked within the organization?
I think they like him, but I don't think they want to repeat what was the last season and a half of just unhappiness and throughout the whole situation. It's kind of one of the that time has come and gone. But he has better relationships or worse relationships with varying people in the organization. I mean, I don't want to go one by one, but for example, him and Bob Myers still have a good relationship. But the Warriors I think are too far committed to their little 2 timeline plan. And I just don't think they want to rewind time to 2019. I do think Utah is going to blow it up. Part of Danny Ainge's plan clearly would be to get a top 5 pick next season when it's supposed to be loaded up top, including obviously you get in the Wembanyama sweepstakes, but even the other guys, Scoot Henderson, the guy with the G League Ignite. To me, Utah being a 7 seed, an 8 seed, a 9 seed, a 10 seed, that can't appeal to Danny Ainge. And he's already made the big move to where you take yourself out of title contention when you just accept a bunch of draft picks for Rudy Gobert. So there's no reason for them to stay in the middle. I think if you ask Danny Ainge, do you want to be better or worse than the Sacramento Kings next season? He'd probably say worse. So that's where I think that's going. I think he's just playing a little negotiation hardball with the Knicks, but I think Mitchell will be gone eventually. But that's one team they've hopped ahead of, but it's still a really crowded West.
Yeah, someone has to wind up as James and I were working through this. I think Oklahoma City and Houston will be better, and I think they'll be very, very happy being better to a certain degree, and then being ready to draft in the loaded draft that you were talking about last year. If Utah falls or next year, if Utah falls down, that's awesome. But who's going to be the team that was the equivalent to Portland last year, who just one too many injuries just breaks them apart and they wind up falling completely down?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are candidates, but I mean, if you are the Kings and you are looking at that pocket of the conference, you need Portland to kind of stay down a little bit. You need them to be in your range, and maybe you can, get above them. The Lakers are another team that fell off a cliff last season that are not going to be attempting to do that again. We'll see, how their team materializes. I'm curious how Denver reforms. Michael Porter Jr. Remember, he was supposed to be back in like March, April was kind of the reports, and he never did. So, not that they're going to fall down to like 11th in the conference or something like that.
But you're a Jokic injury away from falling down to 11th in the conference.
Well, that's the thing. Like a lot of teams, like I don't know who. If you just look at 10 teams, like somebody's probably going to go through some injury issues. 2 seasons ago, it was the Warriors. Remember when they went 15-50? Going into the season, nobody was saying this is going to be one of the worst teams in the conference. The Clippers, if they are healthy, they might be the favorite. I mean, I love their roster if you guarantee me full health, but what about their roster over the last few seasons guarantees full health? You just odds would say a team or two will fall down. I don't know who it'll be, but you almost don't need to look at teams. I feel like you need to look at like a win total number if you're the Kings, and like what win total number gets you into like 8-9-ish. Probably about 40, 44, something like that.
Yeah, 34 is not going to do it this year. That was the Spurs number last year. It's not going to do it this year. Anthony, great stuff, man. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, man.
Yep. All right, fellas.